yield to the ranking member for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our witnesses. I'm glad to be back for our first hearing of 2024. In the words of Yogi Berra, it's like deja vu all over again. Once again, for at least the fifth time in this Congress, our colleagues across the aisle have gathered us here to discuss how the Biden administration needs to do more for the offshore oil and gas industry. Not for the first time, not for the second time, not for the third time or fourth time, but for the fifth time. At today's hearing, we'll hear about how the Biden administration's plan to ramp down offshore oil and gas leasing is hurting our, quote, energy security and economic futures. But notably absent from those arguments are whose security and whose economic futures. Oil and gas companies already control more than 12 million acres of federal waters in the Gulf of Mexico. Over 75% of the lease industry holds remain unused. To my disappointment, it's clear that we will be locked into decades more of oil and gas development, and the United States is already, including under the Biden administration, producing record amounts of oil. Oil and gas production continues to climb in the Gulf of Mexico already, but rather than Americans seeing lower energy prices, as has been the argument, job creation, as has been the argument, or, quote, energy independence, as has been the argument, all we see is increasing profits for oil companies, price volatility for consumers, declining industry jobs, increasing layoffs, and public health and safety crises exactly in the communities where the production is happening. For years now, we've seen the industry lay off its oil and gas workforce. In just the last 6 years, we've seen over 700,000 oil and gas workers leaving the industry due to drastically declining wages and uncertain futures. At the same time, the same oil and gas companies are doling out million-dollar bonuses to their CEOs, spending billions of dollars in stock buybacks to artificially pump up the stock price, and raising dividends for mostly already wealthy shareholders. Meanwhile, the industry's social and environmental impacts are left out of the conversation. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, offshore oil and gas accounts for nearly 20% of carbon emissions from federal lands and waters. And my colleagues across the aisle argue that offshore drilling in the Gulf is cleaner and safer than abroad. But as my colleague Mr. Huffman likes to say, that's like arguing filtered cigarettes won't cause cancer. We're already living with the dangerous consequences of our reliance on fossil fuels. Just last week, the United Nations released its annual economic outlook for 2024. And in it, economists warn that the climate crisis and extreme weather as a result of oil and gas production are expected to disrupt global food production and exacerbate economic instability around the world. Communities along the Gulf Coast must constantly grapple with the consequences of oil spills, air and water pollution, land loss, and displacement. The relentless pursuit of profit has led to the degradation of our resources, jeopardizing the health and well-being of American citizens. Again, we must ask, who is the offshore oil and gas industry serving, and who is it leaving behind? It's time we ramp down and phase out fossil fuel production on federal lands and waters. It's necessary to stave off the worst impacts of the climate crisis and create a more equitable future where everyone has the right to live free from pollution. Our coastal communities can transition in a way that supports jobs and cleans up the environment. Ports are already supporting the offshore wind industry with more opportunities to come. The policies we debate here can help or hinder that transition. We must make sure our federal waters are part of the climate solution instead of the climate problem. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I am going to now yield to the chairman of the full committee, Chairman Westerman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Stahlborn. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today.
Thanks, Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I also want to thank all of our witnesses for their excellent testimony today and also for their service to the country, and also members of this committee who served in the uniform as well as in this body. Mr. Seidel, you have the right, or general side. I want to look at 3 attacks on politicization or diversity changes, and the thing that I guess people are calling woke. I want to start with women in the military, and of course, women were systematically excluded from the military for a long time, and there's a huge struggle about that. And finally, women were able to enter the armed forces on relatively equal status. I don't know if my friend Mr. Higgins would consider these part of the traditional American soldiers or not, but women have served for a long time in different capacities and now have equality. But if I'm assuming that women in the military want the same rights that women across the country do, and after Donald Trump's gerrymandered Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade and women's right to choose, which was in the law for more than a half century, women across the country have rejected that and have stood up for their full reproductive freedom, including in Kansas, Wisconsin, Michigan, California, Vermont, you name it. Everywhere it's been on the ballot, vast majorities of women and men have supported women's right to choose. So I assume, now I don't have a study on it, but I assume women in the military feel the same way, and that they would want to maintain their right to choose their own reproductive health care. Now, Senator Tuberville interfered with hundreds and hundreds of military promotions for many, many months in order to stop women in the military from having their complete full access to reproductive choice and to health care. Now, who do you think is politicizing the military? Is it Senator Tuberville with his anti-choice agenda, where he wants to dictate to all of the women of the military what their access will be to health care? Or is it those women themselves? Are they the ones that are somehow perpetrating a woke agenda by saying that they want to have equal choice? And don't we depend on women in the military these days? Last I saw, it was something like 18 or 20%, even in the Army. So please answer that if you would.
Yes, I would say that Senator Tuberville created political pawns out of those general officers. We have a non-political army, and we're one of the few countries in the history of the world that has never had a military coup d'etat, and it's partly because we are non-political. And yet, Senator Tuberville created political pawns for a policy he disagreed with. I couldn't disagree more with him for doing that and hurting our force and those general and flag officers.
The military also depends on lots of African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans. That's just a reality. You might love it, you might hate it, you might be ambivalent about it, you might just accept it. But in any event, that's the reality, as I understand it. And in any event, the Army decided that it wanted to rename military bases that had been named not after U.S. generals, but after Confederate generals who joined the Confederacy in rebellion against the Union. So, like Fort Benning was renamed after a pro-Union, pro-American general. Fort Gordon was renamed as Fort Eisenhower. Fort Hill was renamed as Fort Walker. And yet, I take it this is part of the big anti-woke arraignment and indictment of the military, that we have renamed military bases after pro-Union, pro-American soldiers, generals, people who've been loyal and faithful to the Union, as opposed to those who have opposed the Union and took up arms against the Union in traitorous insurrection. Now, who's politicizing this question? Is it the people who go along with the Army's decision to say that's who our bases should be named after, pro-Americans, or the people who are wanting to stick to the old Confederate battle names? And I'd like you to address that, and also Mr. Lohmeyer, I think you've taken the position against changing the names. Yeah.
Well, remember that the names were changed, Congressman, because this body voted overwhelmingly, overrode the veto of President Trump to create the naming commission, of which I served as vice chair. It was my proudest moment to rename those after true American heroes and not those who chose treason to preserve slavery.
Thank you. And do you agree with that, Mr. Lohmeyer?
I'll say that it's my view that Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has politicized the military. As soon as the Supreme Court decision was made, he issued a policy memorandum blaming the Supreme Court's decision to reverse Roe v. Wade on the recruitment.
Wait,
and
but I'm
retention.
asking about the
You already-
naming. I'm
but
asking
you
about the
brought that
naming.
up.
I'm asking about the naming
there.
of our military bases.
I'm
The
getting
remake.
there,
If you don't want to
Mr.
address
Raskin.
it, say you don't want to answer it.
Yeah,
but I understand you take
I
the.
walked Black Lives Matter Plaza yesterday with a Chinese American.
Yeah, I didn't
woman
ask
who
you
served-
about that.
No,
The
I'm
Chinese
answering your
American-
question. Excuse
Okay.
me.
Yeah.
And she advocated. She
Is it
survived-
okay, Mr. Chairman, if we
she
go over here
advocated
because
for leaving those
the witness
signs
wants
up.
to
No, I'd like
filibuster
to
a little
answer
bit.
more than yes or no
We can
questions.
let him answer the question.
Yeah, I can let him answer. Well, because I wasn't quite done yet, but now he's occupying my time. If you want him to answer, that's fine. So yes, about the renaming of the bases after pro-union, pro-American
Thank
generals.
you, Mr. Raskin. I'd like
Yeah.
to answer that question in more than just a yes or no format.
Okay.
I walked the Black Lives Matter Plaza yesterday with Xi Van Fleet, Chinese Maoist Cultural Revolution survivor, and I had an interesting conversation with her in which she advocated, I'd never thought about this before. And by the way, I don't address this topic in my book. I wrote about Marxist critical race theory. She said, I'd recommend that once we defeat wokeism, we leave all of the Black Lives Matter paint on the ground and the signs naming the streets. I asked her why. She says, because it's a reminder that once here on the north side of the White House, we had a woke revolution, a Marxist revolution take place, and I agree with that. It's a reminder that there has been such divisive conflict in this enemy before that people were willing to use violent force to hurt one another. I have no problem with the general's efforts.
If I understand you correctly, I'm trying to torture out an
We'll
answer,
just
but
let him-
what you're saying is that we should have army bases named after Confederate generals or Nazi generals, people we've defeated
No,
in war.
I'm
Is
not,
that right?
I'm not willing
Just a
to
minute.
let you put words in my mouth. I'm
We're
happy to-
we're
Well,
about
just to
2
answer the
minutes
point.
over here, so
That's
we're
fine.
just going to let Mr. Lohmeyer finish, and that's it.
So my point is, this is not an issue in which I've actively been involved. The renaming of base. I wrote a book about Marxist DEI, Marxist critical race theory. That's my expertise. I have no personal issue with the fact that this gentleman to my left, who honorably served his country, has been a part of a commission to do that. I have personal opinions about why it's wrong-headed and a part of an ideological push, but this is not my
So
issue.
you would not have renamed them, in other words.
Well, we're
Point of
we're
order.
2.5
That's
minutes
not
over.
something I ever focused on.
All right, I think I got my answer,
not
Mr.
something I've
Chairman.
ever
I'll yield
focused
back
Go
to you.
for Mr. Biggs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the witnesses being here today. So, Mr. Lohmeyer, when we look at some of the things that have been said by the gentleman to your left, and I don't think I can pronounce your name. I want to pronounce it right.
Sigilly.
Mr. Sigilly, yes, thank you. And I've read your testimony. I'm interested to know your reaction to his positions with regard to the diversification of the military
Sure.
and DEI. in
Thank you.
particular.
One point that the general made with which I disagree is that diversity is our strength. I don't think there's any evidence for that, but definitions matter. Words matter, and we're losing touch with this. I would reject the notion that diversity is our strength based on DEI definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Merit-based, okay, I'm going to get away from that because if we're trying to find a unity of understanding, let me say this. Skill and performance matter in the military if you'd like to deter conflict and win our nation's wars, period. As a commander in the military, I had a black colonel fly across the country to promote me to lieutenant colonel because I loved the hell out of the guy and respect his views on the Federalist Papers, which he was teaching me after work hours, and because he was the best leader I've ever worked with. The best airman that I had working for me, incidentally, was a transgender airman. So don't bullshit me and say that you think you know what you're talking about. You've never served. You don't understand how this works. We care about performance in the military, period. You don't know what you're talking about. Most of the people in this room don't know what they're talking about. We need lethality in the military, period. All of the stuff you guys talk about, the men and women in uniform don't think about. They go play Call of Duty at night after they learn their mission and execute that mission, period. They don't know what you're talking about. They don't know what you're voting on. They don't care about your sexual preference. They don't care what you look like, and they don't care what the person next to them looks like, period. I'm a citizen of this country, and I can dislike you and criticize you all I want here, but our men and women in uniform cannot. And so I speak on their behalf when I say lethality matters, merit-based selection and promotions matter, and your ideology doesn't matter one bit. And we need to identify principles which will preserve our union and preserve the unity of the United States military. If we do not, we'll lose that union. And it's my contest. Whatever Truman did decades ago, you ask your average military service member when Truman was the President of the United States, they can't even tell you. But my point is, they're focused on what's happened since the George Floyd riots. There are things that have happened in the last 3 years in our military that we're up here to testify about, not the things that happened 60 years ago. We're great today because of what we've done for the last half century in the fighting of the Cold War.
And Mr. Lohmeyer, what has happened in the last 3 years that has caused lethality to deteriorate in the military?
There's been an overt politicization of the military workplace and the forcing of trainings that are anti-American, that criticize our founders, that allege that white supremacy is a problem within the military ranks, which has never been proven, and all of that rhetoric that occurred once Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin took office led to a bunch of moaning and bitching and complaining behind closed doors of our service members, and I heard it as a commander. And so I wrote a formal written IG complaint about it that was dismissed by senior leaders because they were afraid of the political and racial climate that we've created in this country. And so they were afraid to hold one another accountable for their politics. Senior leaders. So they're not held accountable for their political worldview, but young people will be held accountable. I'm living evidence and a living example of the fact that the diversity initiatives are discriminatory. I was kicked out for saying I'd like to depoliticize the workplace, not for advocating for Republicanism, or excuse me, small r, Republican, not for advocating for Republican candidates, not for criticizing Democrat candidates. I never publicly advocated for anyone politically, but I was forced out because of viewpoint discrimination. Diversity initiatives are discriminatory, and inclusion initiatives are exclusive of my viewpoint. So, and so I'm living evidence that the politicization of the military workplace in the past several years is discriminatory, and it discriminates specifically against conservatism and Christianity, period.
Mr. Chairman, I want to submit for the record something called Declaration of Military Accountability, an open letter to the American people from signatories of the Declaration of Military Accountability into the record.
So entered.
And then I apologize. I actually had questions for Mr. Thibault and Mr. Seshley as well, but we've run out of time, and I don't think I'm going to get that additional 2.5 minutes that the ranking member got. So I'll yield back.
Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Sedguli, first of all, thank you all for your service to our country. Really do appreciate it.
I now recognize Ms. Glusenkamp from the great state of Washington for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Williams, and thank you to our panelists for being here today. So I, before being elected, I own an auto repair and a machine shop. And, you know, we all have these little member bathrooms, right? You're as a member here. And on my medicine cabinet, I have a taped fake $100 bill that got passed to me when I was running the till at the shop. And, you know, just a good reminder, like, don't take fake money. You know, I guess I did not report that to the police, right? The bank didn't report it to the police. And I think that what gives me heartburn is not so much the big guys that have the capital to institute more security measures and to prosecute, and they have the lawyers, they have the connections. It kind of becomes a race to the bottom, and it's businesses like mine and yours, Mr. Scott, that are the ones that see this impact, and it's our employees are the ones that get come after with a pipe or whatever, and it's a real human impact. And so it's the little guys that get hurt first and worst. And so I'm concerned about the impact on small businesses and entrepreneurs. And I guess, Mr. Scott, as another business owner, what do you see as some of these driving factors?
Congresswoman, thank you for the question. When we talk about the driving factors, that may be beyond the scope of my skill set. I'm a restaurant operator, not necessarily a sociologist. I go back to a previous question in that we oftentimes, actually in one restaurant, we saw the same person come in 3 different times, each time a little more threatening, each time till the third time actually pushed an employee. So it's the employees on the front line that are bearing the brunt of this. I'm sure there are many, many possible solutions to this, and they probably all need to be put into place. But first and foremost, we need to take steps to keep our team members safe at work and our guests safe when they come to the restaurants.
Thank you. Dr. Roman, I'd like your perspective. You know, you're familiar with good arts law that like once something becomes a measurement, it becomes useless because all of the parties figure out how to game it to advance their own interests. You know, like in our case, like we're not going to report these kinds of crimes because no one's going to do anything. What's going to happen? I'm going to lose 5 hours of my life I'm never going to get back. And so I'm wondering, what do we know about underreporting? What do we know about how in rural communities like mine, response time might factor into underreporting? What are some of the solutions you see? And to my colleague, Mr. Mauser's point, like sometimes it feels like all we do is like study things. Like when we see, I mean, what are the things we can do now?
Right. So we know that underreporting, we call it the dark figure of crime, that if you look at the National Crime Victimization Survey and you ask people if they've been victimized, you get a number that is far higher than the number that you get from the FBI, which is crimes reported to the police. So we do know this. What we don't know...
Scale of like...
So it varies a lot by the kind of crime. The more serious crime, the more likely it is to be reported. So felonies are reported more often than misdemeanors. So things like shoplifting are underreported. And then it matters whether you can get compensated through your insurance company or not, right? So if somebody hits you, you can't. If your house is burgled, you can, so you'll report it. The thing here is that when we talk about small business owners and the threats that they face, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of threats, and each one of them has a different set of solutions. So there's theft along the supply chain, where things are stolen on the way to the store. There's in-store employee theft, which is a big part of shrinkage. Then there's theft by opportunists and amateurs, people stealing diapers for their kids that they can't afford. And then there's organized retail theft. They're criminal enterprises. And I think we all agree that we want the resources to go to those organized criminal enterprises, or even along the supply chain where you get the biggest bang for your really limited policing resources. So the better data isn't just a flag I fly, but it actually will help us to make better choices in what kind of policies and practices we implement.
Mr. Scott, in your day-to-day, is that what you feel like you'd like to see resources allocated towards?
Well, the resources need to be allocated to crime prevention, but also, I think first and foremost allocated to actually apprehending criminals and keeping them from coming back in.
The person that created the very convincing fake money in my member bathroom. Thank you, Chairman Williams.
Thank you. And I now